Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 228th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And we are welcoming the new year with a series on heart and mind connection. And this week, I am speaking with Dr. Rolake Ojo. As a medical doctor turned graphic designer, Rolake's job has always been helping people to get better. Previously, she did this by treating patients, and today she does this by making health and wellness experiences more intuitive and rewarding. Her focus is branding and user experience interface, UX/UI design, that helps clinicians and healthcare providers build trusting relationships with their audience. She now advocates for the importance of design in healthcare and helps other health professionals carve their own path through the podcast Brand New Doctor, which is excellent, and public speaking engagements. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Rolake, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, honestly.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. And of course, we're going to talk about your podcast more, but congratulations. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation. So I read your bio out, but I think it's really nice for listeners to hear what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, so my career is all about answering the question, how can we make the experience of healthcare more human, more rewarding, more intuitive, all of these things? And how can we do that through the power of design, really? And so I am focusing on my work as a graphic designer, and I'm really building out my portfolio, working with healthcare companies, and thinking about how branding and digital design specifically can help to build stronger, more trusting relationships with their audience. And so that I find really rewarding, because a lot of the time I think that in other kind of commercial scenarios, we have an understanding that a human connection is really important. But for some reason, that's missing a lot of the time when it comes to healthcare and how we engage with our healthcare providers. A lot of the time we start off that journey online. And so with the digital design and the branding, I can really help to start that relationship on a good foot. And with my experience as a doctor as well, I have that understanding of where clinicians are coming from, where patients are coming from, and trying to bring those two things together. So that's the design side of things. But the podcast, and I guess we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is really all about how we can carve our own career paths in healthcare, and how doing that is actually better for everyone involved, is better for our experience of healthcare if we are being our best selves, we're bringing our best selves to the table. And so I love talking to clinicians who are doing this. I love talking to other people, other industry experts who have a perspective on healthcare that maybe we don't hear when we're in the healthcare environment, because it's kind of an echo chamber. And just seeing how people are maybe doing something a little bit different with their career. Are they doing something alongside their career? Are they creating a new alternative path for themselves? Are they talking about a subject that we don't put enough, or we don't pay enough attention to? And I hope that by doing that, I can help people who are feeling quite disempowered at this time, who maybe feel creatively stifled as well, because, you know, this healthcare career path is oftentimes kind of stifling, because we are following a path a lot of the time. And I want to show that it is possible to carve your own path as well.
Yeah. So on that, how did you transition, and what made you want to transition from being a medical doctor to a graphic designer? And also, I don't know what speciality you were. So if you want to say about what specific interests in medicine that you had.
Yeah. So I guess if I go back a little bit and explain how I got into medicine, you might understand why it is that I left. But ultimately, I think, you know, my earliest experiences of school in the UK, coming over from Nigeria, were not great, and they left me feeling stupid, for lack of a better word, really. And so a lot of my career, my schooling career, and my working career was about proving myself and proving that the opposite was true. And so that's kind of how I got into medicine in the first place, thinking that it was like the ultimate way to prove that I wasn't stupid. And so really getting there, I realized that it wasn't for me. It wasn't It wasn't something that I could see myself doing in the long run, because it is a really difficult, grueling kind of career. And if you don't have a passion for the clinical side of things, then it doesn't make sense for you to be there torturing yourself, essentially doing something you don't really have a deep passion for. And I felt that there were other ways that I could help people that weren't so punishing to me at the same time. So I stayed until up for 3 years. I trained for 6 years, and then I worked for 3 years. I didn't specialize. It was actually at the point where I would need to think about specializing that I decided that I would leave and I would pursue something else. And so I, first of all, took a bit of time out for myself. I lived in France for a little bit of time, for not very long. It was about 6 months. I was teaching English as a foreign language. I explored project management in the tech industry. I then worked with my sister, who owns a dental practice. I was managing the business side of things. And it was really there that I discovered that my love of creativity, the things that I really have a passion for, were actually, they had a place in healthcare. They were valuable in a healthcare setting, because I could see that a lot of other dental practices didn't pay attention to these things. They didn't care so much about the feeling that people had when they walked in, and that kind of human touch that I think is so necessary when you are going somewhere that frightens you, like a dentist. And so that was really when I decided that, I would go to design school. I think that for a long time, I wanted to be a designer. It was kind of a passion of mine for a long time, but I couldn't find a clear enough way that I would use those skills. And it wasn't until I could see that I could combine those two things that I decided that I would go to design school and see how I could make it work.
And I think that's such an amazing story, because we're going to talk a little bit more about culture and culture connections and expectations. But, that fact that the heart and mind. So, and that's not to say that the work that you do now, it doesn't have a mind and logic and thinking element to it at all, but the mind saying, you were really good at school, you are really smart in an academic sense, and then going, wait a second, my heart's not enjoying this. So what does the term heart and mind connection mean to you?
Yeah, and I think this is such a good question. It really had me thinking, because I guess when you talk about heart and mind, it's kind of these are words that I maybe haven't really attached to my experience, but they are so relevant to what I've been through and what a lot of other people who are in an environment that they don't feel is entirely right for them feel. And I really think that your heart is really where all of your dreams, your aspirations, the things that you are passionate about are. I think that's what your heart holds. Whereas I think your mind is more about logic and about making things practically happen. And I think what causes a lot of pain for people is a kind of disconnect between those two things, that your heart wants something, but your mind is telling you that you shouldn't or you can't have something for whatever reason. And that was definitely true for me for a long time when it came to design work. I suppose I think that I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to do something creative, but my mind was telling me that there aren't really jobs in this environment, or you can't make any money in this space, and it's ridiculous because you went to medical school. Why would you throw all of that away? And so yeah, that caused me a lot of pain for a long time. And it wasn't until I could get my heart and my mind on the same side, where what I wanted was also what my mind was trying to make happen in reality. When my mind could see that it was possible, then it kind of started to come together. It's not to say that I don't still have these struggles now, but I do think that the key is to be able to have both of them on the same side. And a big part of that is about really how we talk to ourselves, because your mind is keeping you company most of the time. So yeah, that's what I think, heart and mind. It's about what we want and what we think is actually possible.
And then I think there's another bit to that, actually. It's global majority Black diaspora communities, which I think is however we define community and what our families expect of us, and that whole thing around sacrifice, being grateful, being thankful,
absolutely,
not disrespecting elders. So, and I think that for me, I don't know what you think, but is split between heart and mind as well.
Yeah, massively. I think that for so long, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but as a Black person, I think that there's a lot that maybe other people will be able to relate to as well, where we've been in survival mode for so long, where it's been up to our mind to kind of help us to get through a difficult time, that it is, it's really hard to start thinking about what you really want and what makes you happy. I think, to be honest, when you have real, legitimate problems right in front of you, the idea of what you really want and happiness is actually, it feels irrelevant. It maybe feels even cruel to ask someone to think about those things at that time when it feels so, so far away from them. And that was definitely, with my experience, I'm first generation technically, but I grew up here from the age of 3. And my mum is, the older generation is just so far removed from this idea of following your dreams. I don't think that is what leads them to make the decisions that they make. I don't think that what happiness necessarily is a big deciding factor. It's not to say that they don't think about these things at all, but I think there's a different kind of approach to it. My mum, God bless her, honestly, she is really supportive of what I do now, but it didn't make sense to her when I told her that I didn't want to continue with medicine. It was just out of the realm of reason or possibility for her. And I remember telling her, she asked me, why would you want to do this? I remember telling her that it was because I wanted to be happy, and doing what I do right now doesn't make me happy. And even as those words were coming out of my mouth, I could hear how ridiculous that would sound to her. I felt silly in that moment, even talking about happiness, because I know that happiness isn't necessarily a big deciding factor for her. So yeah, I think that it is really difficult if you are part of a global majority and you have this kind of background of trying to make ends meet or stability or moving country and all of those disrupting things that you have to kind of get a handle on. It's really, really hard to then shift into the mode of now it's now that you're okay, you're not putting out fires. How can you make space for joy in your life and actually go for the things that you want to?
I think that's so true, and so much resonated with me and what you're saying. I think it's almost like, what's happiness got to do with it, for God's sake?
Yeah.
Even if it's not articulated like that, I'm not trying to put words in your mum's mouth or represent swathes of people. But yesterday on a friend's Facebook story, actually, there was a really interesting story she'd put up, and it was 9 squares, and it was about capitalism. And it was, I can't remember all of them, but it was like, if you rest, you're lazy. You have to deserve rest. You must be traditionally successful. If you work hard, you'll get success. And I thought, wow, these things are all the things I grew up with. And I messaged her saying, this is basically summarizes my slice of South Asian culture. And she was like, well, you can see how endemic capitalism is. And I thought, yes, but I do think Gujarati culture is very into that. And yet, and then I was listening to an audiobook, and it was about Punjabi families, and it's like a comedy book. But then this woman opened the door, and she was Gujarati, and it said in the book she had a face like she'd sucked a load of lemons, and I burst out laughing because I was like, wow, that is that summarizes a lot of people I know from the community. And so I think you've touched on some of them, but is there anything else you think about the challenges for from your perspective as an individual person who identifies as Black, but also trends that you've seen and from your podcast as well, in how to connect heart and mind, particularly when it comes to making decisions about career changes?
It's a good question. I think that there is definitely the cultural aspect of things where we've been taught. I mean, I think it's a similar kind of thing, not just in Nigeria, but in other parts of the world. Being a doctor, being a lawyer or an engineer, there's one of 5 careers that you can choose from, essentially, if you want to be thought of as successful. And so there's that kind of expectation. But I think that when you are in a kind of caring environment, there's a lot of expectation as a whole from society, no matter where you're from, that can really feed into that feeling that you shouldn't follow your heart. You feel like maybe your heart is betraying you because you should only ever really want to care for people, and if you feel that you want to move away and you need to look after yourself, then that's somehow being selfish, right? And I think that is a huge source of pain for people, because there's just so much guilt around that. And again, I think that is a kind of disconnect that we have between our heart and our minds, essentially, that our heart wants something, but our mind is telling us that we shouldn't want that thing. And so yeah, I think that comes up a fair amount. I recently spoke about my experience of this, of someone asked me, well, I get people ask me relatively frequently, actually, if I feel bad about leaving medicine, in various ways. In their own way, they'll ask me kind of that question. I guess ultimately they're all trying to ask me, like, do you feel selfish for what you've done? And really I've started to look at it as, there are so many reasons why we go into the things that we're going into, and we have our values that guide us in our lives throughout our lives. And the decision to do something or not do something shouldn't be based upon, is this selfish or is this not selfish? Because that's not helpful. Really, we should be asking, does this align with our values or does it not align with our values? Because then we're actually judging ourselves on what we care about and what we need in our lives. And also balancing that, does this align with my values? And is this also tenable for me as a human being? Is this an environment that I can survive in, and that is enriching to me as a person, to my soul as well? It's also important to balance that, whatever good we're doing in the world can't be destroying us at the same time.
And I think, like you said, with a lot of the trauma that may be conscious or unconscious through our legacies, through our histories, of which I'm still really discovering, we might not know that. And there's a reverberation that I think sometimes we have to discover, because it is seen as really indulgent. And in episode 199 with the lovely Nana Parry, we talk about this. So he talks about his Ghanaian heritage and how when he transitioned to being an entrepreneur, his parents were really upset with him, but he's super successful. He sold businesses, and he said now they think it was their idea. So we had a little laugh about that on the episode. But yeah, I think it's that thing. And in that episode, and I'll say it again now, I talk about the fact that I went to see Nish Kumar talk. It was like an interview. It wasn't a stand-up show. And he said, speaking specifically about Asian parents in the wider sense, that they're not trying to be killjoys, but we're so terrified of being chucked out. He's got Sri Lankan heritage, that we're trying to make ourselves indispensable. But we forget that actually we have to kind of trust and think things will be okay. But that's really hard to do if that's not your lived experience.
Yeah, I think that again, I don't want to presume with other cultures, but I would say that kind of collectivist non-Western cultures are very much built on respect. And that's definitely the case in Nigeria, where I'm from. And respect is just everything. And this lends itself really well to people who, want to go into medicine and go into these types of careers, because they are very much about following a path and about obedience, which is something that we're very, very practiced in our cultures. And so you find that, when I went to medical school, when I was just going to, I think, just doing my A levels as well, I remember going into a new kind of environment I'd previously been learning in, I was at a school that was kind of, I suppose, lower middle class, majority white, lower to middle class, majority white kind of school. I was one of 4 Black teenagers in a class of over 200. And the experience there, I never felt that I fit in there. But I always kind of stood out in terms of my academics, because I would do what the teacher told me to do, essentially. I would follow instructions. And so when people would turn up and they'd say, I haven't done my homework, I would just be like, why? It just didn't make sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you do that? An adult told you to do your homework and you didn't do it. It didn't make any sense to me, because I was just so used to doing whatever my mom told me to do. And so, I'm grateful on the one hand that I had that kind of upbringing from my parents, because it did teach me about, how to do well in school. I learned how to follow instructions and all of these things. But the problem is that it can go too far sometimes, that if we carry that kind of good student, obedient child kind of mentality throughout our lives, it can actually be kind of crippling to us in terms of like, now is a time you're an adult. No, because our culture never turns around and says, oh, now is your time to do what you want to. You are forever a child in your culture's eyes, in fact, because you're never the oldest, actually. And so until you're perhaps the matriarch or patriarch of your family. So you can hold on to that kind of good student, good child mentality into your 40s and your 50s and still be doing the job that your parents want you to, the job that your culture wants you to. And I think that's a real shame. So, it would be great if there was some kind of emancipation type of ceremony or something like that. But I don't know if typically we have that kind of rite of passage. So we have to kind of learn to give that to ourselves, particularly if you are coming from a non-Western kind of environment.
Was so beautifully put, and it kind of gave me goosebumps as you were talking, because I completely agree with you. And I think, when you decide not to have children as well, I think this is all cultures, actually. I don't think this is just about global majority cultures at all. You can be responsible, you could win every prize in the world, but I think you're just not, like you said, you're not really seen as I think that there's something, and when you were talking, it's exactly the same for me, my experience of my South Asian culture. But I do think there's something in society that if you don't, living in the global north, you're not a mum, so what do you really know? So that's another interesting element for me. And I think, you said you're a child even in your 40s and 50s. I definitely feel that.
But that's an interesting point that you raised, though, about children, because I guess it's obviously not the same thing, but that assertion that a decision that you have made for yourself is somehow selfish. I've always really struggled with that idea that, when people ask me, do I feel selfish? I'm like, I kind of get where they're coming from, but I also kind of don't, because it's my job. And it's the same, if you're having children, I think we need to ask these questions more often, that why would someone jump to that conclusion when it's your body? Ultimately, I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But the work that you do, and the conversations that you have on your podcast, they probably nourish you, but we also have to think about, we've been talking about our own mental health and well-being. So how do you do that? How do you look after your own mental health? What are your top 3 tips?
Yes. I actually wrote these down so I wouldn't forget. Yeah, so I had to think about this, because I don't know if I had ever thought in such clear terms as to what it is that I do. But I'd say, number one for me is just having something in my life that I can be completely present with. For me, that's gymnastics. So a lot of my day, I feel like I'm planning or thinking about the future, and I can feel oftentimes that, I'm always projecting forwards, and it can be hard to get into a moment of flow at times, even as a designer, when it's creative, it's supposed to be all about creativity. And so I need to have something in my week that allows me to just focus on that, for an hour, no matter what's going on in my life. That's where I am doing that thing. And I find that when I go to gymnastics, whatever it is that we're learning, it doesn't matter what's going on outside, for that hour, that's all that I'm doing. And I find that so refreshing. By the end of it, whatever feelings or emotions I had going into it feel so much more manageable by the end of it, and it puts things in perspective. So, I mean, I'd say that's the number one tip for anybody, really, is to have some kind of practice like that. It could be creative, or it could be sport, whatever it is that just allows you to just do what's in front of you for that time and really get fully engrossed in that. I think the next thing I would say is just spending time with people who love you, no matter what happens in your life, no matter what you achieve or don't achieve in your life, I think is so, so important. I know maybe it's said too much, but I just think it's so, so important for you to celebrate with the people now that you would want to celebrate with when you have your big win, because you already have those people, and maybe you don't have that big win yet, or whatever else it is that you think you are kind of putting your self-worth on, but you have those people in your life. So I think it's really, really important, no matter what's going on in our lives, to make time for the people that really care about us. I have 3 nieces and a nephew, and I get so much energy from being around them, and I love seeing these kids, and I can be doing anything going on in my life, and I just have to make a bit of time for that, because I'll never get that back. Ultimately, I'll never get back their childhood. I'll never get back time that I could have been spending with them. And I guess the last thing I would say is just, again, talking about that kind of heart and mind connection, is about really working on your mind, I guess, because I think that your mind, as I say, your mind is kind of the thing that keeps you company all of the time. It's always talking, at least for me. You're always thinking. I know there's some people, I've met some people where I ask them, what are you thinking? And they say nothing. And I kind of don't believe that's true. I don't know how that's possible. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that your inner voice is kind of the inner environment that you are living with as well. So it's really, really important for you to take care of that and make sure that you are creating a compassionate inner environment for yourself. In the same way that a toxic working environment can be really damaging to us as people, the same goes for a toxic inner environment too. And so, I had someone come on my podcast recently. Her name is Amy Story, and she was talking about compassion, how important compassion is, and teaching that to healthcare professionals from an early point in their career, so they take that with them wherever they go. I think it's really important, again, to raise that point, because it's not just about our inner voice, but it's about the culture that we're creating around us. And so it just really reverberates everywhere. If you are thinking good, kind thoughts towards yourself, you move through the world in a different way, and you interact with other people in a different way as well. So yeah, I think those are the main things. But I would really focus on the inner environment that you're creating, and choosing those kinds of kind voices that you had growing up, because the harsh inner voice that you have, I've heard a lot of people say, isn't actually you. It's something that you've internalized from somewhere else, from a harsh voice you heard as a child. You may not even remember where it was from, but you can choose kinder voices, and think about all of the coaches you've had in your life. It can be teachers, parents, it can be actual sports coaches, whoever actually helped you by being compassionate. That's the voice that you want to have in your daily life as well.
Thank you. Really great, beautiful tips. So finally, if people want to know more about your work, I will, of course, include the link in the show notes. How should they contact you, and what kind of projects and things are you open to right now?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can find me. It's Rolake Ojo. And my website is rolakeojo.com. I'm also on Instagram, but you'll mostly find me on LinkedIn or through my website as well. And I'm open to connecting with anyone who is passionate about how we can make the healthcare experience more human. I'm, as I say, building my portfolio in the healthcare and the health tech space. So I'm very much open to hearing about kind of opportunities to design better experiences for patients and clinicians, anyone who's involved in the healthcare experience.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Really great to kickstart the month. You're our first guest talking about heart-mind connections. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And take care, listeners, and do join us next week where we'll be talking more about heart and mind connection. Until then, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.